Hello, welcome to a video lecture that I prepared for you in which I talk about some sample documents and some related documents that I've uploaded to D2L on the employment packet. So let me go to D2L and talk about those documents. Okay, so from our D2L page, go into the content area. And once inside the content area, go to the employment packet section. And you'll see a number of documents that I've uploaded there. One of them is an example, kind of a sample of the organizational profile. So let me open that up. Okay, so what I've got here is a document. It's labeled organizational profile at the top. We don't want to label all of our documents. We don't want to have them look like typical classroom assignments, such as the cover letter or letter of transmittal. We don't want to put a label on the top of it or a standard academic heading on top of the document. Make these look mostly like real-world documents. This one I think it's okay to label at the top. And what I'm imagining with this particular document is that you kind of have the name of the company that you're looking at up on top, and then kind of some fields of quick reference information underneath. You don't have to have these fields here, but this is just kind of how I imagined it. Frequently, students will tell me something like, I couldn't find out the CEO or the annual sales or whatever. And I say, that's fine. These are just suggested fields up here. You can completely ignore them and put what you think is most relevant up here. And then after that, I kind of imagine some paragraphs about the company, enough to make up a full page to kind of show me that you've done your homework on the company. The idea behind this document is that it serves as a quick reference, kind of a cheat sheet for you in that 5 minutes before a job interview where you can't remember the first name of the person that you're going to be talking to, and you just kind of have a brain freeze or something. So this is kind of like your quick reference sheet at the last minute. In reality, a lot of people might actually print out a number of pages from the company's website or something and circle and highlight key things, but I think this is somewhat of a real-world document in that if you were going to a job fair and you're going to be talking to 20, 30 companies in one day, this can help you to keep all of this straight. You can kind of carry this in a little notebook. And down at the bottom, I was imagining 4 or 5 questions that you could ask during a job interview. I think in real-world use as a hard copy document, you might just handwrite those questions on the back, and then after you've talked to them, get away from that interview situation and write up your notes for each of those questions. So we can't quite do that in digitally. We have to create a 2-page document, and I want you to think of this more as a 1-page document with a place for notes on the back. So, but this suggested format that I have here with these fields and then paragraph information about the company, I have seen that a lot of students dispense with this whole thing, that they make this page just a bulleted list of information that they think would be handy to refer to quickly before a job interview, and then they'll put their questions down here, and of course imagine them actually being on the back of the sheet, but I want you to think of it as a single-page document. So there's my example of what the organizational profile can look like. It's up to you what the final product actually looks like, but I am looking for about a page of information about the company and 4 to 5 questions that you could ask during a job interview. Those questions should be intelligent questions, kind of show that you are motivated for this job. Maybe you're talking about upward mobility or relocation or something insightful about the company, rather than how long do I have to work here before I get some time off, or That just sends a bad vibe. People will often say, well, I have this, friend's wedding coming up, in 3 months. Is that going to be a problem? Again, that kind of sends a negative tone. And so what I would do is get the job first and then inform them about your friend's wedding coming up in 3 months and deal with it then. So, anyway, there's the organizational profile. Let me talk about some of the other documents that I posted. Okay, so the next sample document that I've got is kind of a genericized version of a letter that I actually used when I was applying for jobs before I came to West Chester University. I think maybe I'd used this the previous year, and I was teaching business writing at the time, so I just used it in my teaching. And while it's old, it's still relevant. So let me talk a little bit about this. And this is, in general, a much longer letter than you're probably going to write. I have some pretty meaty, chunky paragraphs in here, but I still managed to keep it to less than 2 pages. There is kind of a rule of thumb that you'll hear for entry-level positions, that your letter of application shouldn't be longer than a page, and also your resume shouldn't be longer than a page. So that is a rule of thumb, I would say, and that I think if your letter or your resume winds up being a page and a quarter or a page and a half, you're just fine. But do let the documents kind of stand on their own. That the resume is more of just the facts type thing about you, while the letter helps to address some things maybe about the resume, such as a gap in your employment history, or losing a job or something like that. Also, in terms of the qualifications and experiences that they're looking for, you can kind of address some gaps in that as well. Maybe they're looking for a particular level of qualifications, and you're in the ballpark, but you're not quite there. But maybe you can express some enthusiasm for learning on the job. Same thing with experience. Maybe you can say something about your experience. So the letter kind of becomes pretty important in a rhetorical sense. So actually, they're both rhetorical, but the letter is more obviously rhetorical. The resume is rhetorical in the sense that it's an appeal to logos, which is logic or reasoning, and it's presented orderly. Appears to be merely factual, but it actually is a bit more than just factual. It's somewhat rhetorical. So, okay. That being said, let me come back to this letter, and I wanted to point out a few things about this letter. One is, you may notice that there's no letterhead up here at the top. And there's a reason for that. I was a lecturer at Arizona State University at the time, and so I tended to print out my letters on ASU stationery, which is normal and expected in academia. Maybe not as well accepted in the private sector, that you wouldn't want to send out a job application to one company using the letterhead from the company that you already work for. They might frown upon that. So it's just handled a bit differently in academia. But what I encourage students to do is to create their own letterhead that they can use again and again on letters. And you can do it in 30 seconds or less. And I want to show you how to do that. So let me go ahead and go to Word, and I'll show you that. Okay, so I've got a blank document here, and right now the cursor is about 1 inch down, 1 inch in from the side. I oftentimes encourage students to set up their documents so you can see the ruler for some of the formatting that we do in the various documents in the class. And if you want to see the ruler, go to View, and then should be a box to check on ruler. So we can see the margins and everything here. So what I'm going to do is start out by typing my name. Okay, so started out a letter here and typed my name and address at the top here. And this is kind of old style, back in the days of typewriters, that you would do it like this, along the left-hand margin, and then space down a bit and put your date, and space down a bit more, and put what's called the inside address, and then add a extra line break here, your greeting, and then an extra line break here, and then the start of the letter. So, so this is pretty plain and simple, but you don't have to leave it that way. So with desktop publishing and formatting options in programs, we could format the name and address for you at the top as if it were a letterhead. So I'm going to go back home, and I'm going to center it, and I think I'm going to take my name and make it a bit bigger, make it stand out, maybe even bold, and maybe also take this text up here, and make it slightly different from the same font that I'm using in the body of the letter. And so I'm going to choose something, I think I'll go with Garamond. So, so there's my letterhead. Took me 30 seconds. So right now it's set up under the normal margins, 1 inch from the top, 1 inch from the side. I actually don't need a full 1 inch at the top. So with the letterhead, so I'm going to, actually I don't need to highlight it. I'm going to go into Format Document. And then the top margin, I'm going to bring it down to 1/2 inch. And that looks more like you would expect from a letterhead. So the spacing between the letterhead and the date is variable. So I'll go ahead and add a little bit more spacing in there. And the spacing between the date and the inside address is also variable. So I added a little more spacing in there. You can come back and adjust this when you get to the final draft of your letter. I think oftentimes it's good to look at it as a single page document, what I call an arm's length view of the document, and you can see the balance from top to bottom, and sometimes you can go in and adjust that spacing a little bit, tighten it up or space it out a bit more to achieve more of a balance. So let me go back to the zoom that we had here before. Okay, so so the spacing is variable before and after the date. The inside address after that, this is pretty standard. One blank line, and then the greeting, and then one blank line, and then the start of the letter. So the greeting should match as closely as possible the first line of the inside address. So try to make it to someone specific if you can. Find out the name of the and job title of the person you're sending it to. If you can't find that out, maybe a generic job title, like Dear Human Resources Director, or a group of people, Dear Hiring Committee, Dear Search Committee, but do not make it to whom it may concern. That just sounds like you're addressing it to someone who has very little interest in it. So I've received a number of those letters, and there's always a split second where I kind of wonder, am I really concerned? So try to address it more to a person, by name or by job title or by a group of people, hiring committee, a search committee. So then going on, and then I'm going to go back and look at my other letter here in a second. I want to throw in a page break here and go to the next page, because I want to show that since we modified the top margin on that page, it carries forth onto the next page. And maybe your letter won't be this long, but if it is, you can readjust the top margin by going to Format, Document, and Margins again. And so I'm going to put it back on an inch, but look down here at the bottom where it says Apply To, and if I did whole document, it would reset it on that first page. But I'm going to say from this point forward. So now I've got my 1-inch margin again on the second page, but I've still got my 1/2-inch margin on the first page. So let me go back and talk about the example letter that I posted. Okay, so you can see my inside address is Rhetoric and Composition Search Committee. I just shortened it to Dear Search Committee for the greeting. Also notice the greeting has a colon at the end of that. We use a colon for professional correspondence and a comma for personal correspondence. So as I mentioned, I have some big chunky paragraphs in this letter, and probably more than you need to have in yours. But let me explain what's going on here. So I'm going to go back and open up another document on D2L called Job Application Letter Stipulations. So let me review that. Okay, so in this document, I try to outline some best practices for writing letters of application. And so one of the things I'm going to be looking for is 4 separate paragraphs. An introductory paragraph, which has to accomplish certain things. An education paragraph, in which you talk about your educational experience, basically from college level on up. We're not too concerned about high school level and below. And then a previous experience paragraph, again, mainly college level on up. Even if they're part-time jobs in college, it shows your ability to juggle work and school together. But maybe summer lawn mowing jobs when you were in high school, we're not so interested in that. So, and then a concluding paragraph, which also needs to do certain things. So let's go back and look. The introductory paragraph says you should state that you wish to be considered a candidate for the job. You'd be amazed how often people don't do this. So they'll say, I'm interested in the job. Well, that kind of just sounds like you're interested in finding out more information about it. So sometimes people feel like they're being a little too forward when they say that they want to be considered a candidate. But we need to make a polite but confident request here. We do something similar in the conclusion. So I'd start off my information with this statement. Please consider me a candidate for the position of. And so right up front, it's very clear what the purpose of this letter is and what you want to achieve. Should identify the job specifically by title. So I always uppercase the first letter of each word in the job title. And if there's a job number, put that in there as well, because sometimes an organization may be running multiple job searches at the same time, so we want to make sure it goes to the right place. So the introduction should also somehow forecast the rest of the letter, typically by making mention of things that are going to follow, which is your education and your previous employment. So let's go back and take a look at my letter. Okay, so the letter that I drafted, I said, please consider me a candidate for the position of Assistant Professor of Rhetoric and Composition that you've advertised for employment. So, um, very clear statement right at the beginning. The rest of this is a bit long because I was trying to address in my first paragraph the main things that they were looking for in the job ad. And in academia, they're kind of lengthy job ads, but I wanted to get all this out of the way. I'm writing this in paragraph form, and the job ad was in paragraph form, but I can guarantee you that somewhere there's a screening committee that's looking at these materials with a score sheet. And so I tried to address things in order that they had in the job ad just to make their job easier of checking things off as they move down the score sheet. So I mentioned my PhD in rhetoric and writing from Bowling Green State University, and because you had to have that in hand, is what they call it in academia. There's another status, ABD, all but dissertation, and so they don't want someone who's finishing up their dissertation. They want someone who has defended their dissertation and is a fully minted PhD. So I said that. I addressed a previous career in journalism, public information, public relations, because they were looking for something more than just composition courses. And then I had my final statement. I'm hoping to find a position geared toward my teaching and research interests and feel that the assistant professorship you're trying to fill at XYZ State University represents just such an opportunity. So I mentioned my teaching and research interests. I probably should have flipped that and said research and teaching interests, since most academics are try to describe their identity first in terms of their scholarship. So scholarship should have been the next paragraph after that. But you can see this, how you can kind of forecast the rest of the letter. So I did go in and talk about my teaching, and I used an introductory phrase to kind of let the reader know what this paragraph is about as a lecturer at ASU. And then administratively, so the job required some administrative responsibilities. And then I included my previous professional experience because they were looking for something kind of wide-ranging. Then I finally got into my research, and then I mentioned an honor, an award that I received. And then I got into my concluding paragraph. And so let me go back to that other document and tell you what I'm going to be looking for. Okay, so the concluding paragraph should make a polite but confident request for an interview. Can make reference to your resume and can include your contact info. So I didn't do all of those, but let's take a look. So I said, in short, in light of my academic and professional experience and potential, I feel I'd make an ideal candidate for the position. I believe I'm capable, qualified, and committed. I hope you believe so too, and I look forward to hearing from you to discuss my qualifications further. So there's my polite but confident request for an interview. Didn't make reference to my resume, didn't include my contact info, but it's up to you. Your mileage may vary. And then let me show you that down here at the end, we've got what's called the complimentary close. Sincerely, comma, and notice, the extra spacing in between the paragraphs. And basically, sincerely, comma, and then hit that enter or return key 4 times, and then type your name. And then what you're supposed to do is sign your name in between. And we're doing all this digitally, and so there are a couple of things you can do. You can type your name again, and then highlight it and change it to a more scripty font so it'll look like a signature. Or you could do angle bracket, and then the word signed, and then closing angle bracket. And that sends a message to me that you know that it's supposed to be signed. You'd be amazed how often people forget to sign the letter. So I want to make sure that doesn't happen. And as we look back up a little bit, I also wanted to point out that the paragraphs that we're looking at, this is called block style. So there's no indentation on the paragraphs. Instead, there's an extra line of space between paragraphs. And that's actually the way it's done on websites. And This is called full block, what I've got here, because the sincerely and the complimentary close are also to the left, and the date at the top is also to the left. There is something called modified block. You still have to have block style paragraphs, but the sincerely can start at the midpoint, not the right hand margin, but at the midpoint, and go to the right. And then your name can also start at the midpoint and go to the right. And at the top, the date can start at the midpoint and go to the right. So very little difference between full block and modified block. Make sure you're doing that. Make sure you don't indent your paragraphs. That would be redundant. The extra line already indicates a paragraph, so we don't need to indent the paragraphs. Okay, so that's the letter of application. Let me talk about the resume a little bit. Okay, so this is a recent update to my resume in academia. It's called a curriculum vitae, or CV. Curriculum vitae means curricular life. Some people just call it a vita. And so let me talk about several things that are going on here. At the top of the resume, we have identifying information. So your name, address, phone number, email address. You can put your LinkedIn address up there. So what I've done is I have my name centered at the top, and my name is slightly bigger than the rest of the text. But then I've got my university address to the left and my home address to the right. So then moving down through the resume, we have an education section and then employment. I've noticed lately with a lot of the templates on Microsoft Word, and it's okay to use a template for this assignment, that there's a trend to reverse this, to put experience highest, after the identifying information, and then education. And that's a major shift that's happening because historically education was put at the top. So also I want to point out that I'm using what's called a single column format for this. So once we get past the identifying information, everything is basically one big column, and then things are nested underneath. Instead of adding a whole bunch of extra spacing and stuff, I tried to keep this as tight as possible because I'm trying to conserve space, and the single column format is best for conserving space, and using nesting also helps to conserve space. This document is long enough as it is. I think it's about 10 pages, and a lot of CVs in academia are that long. So what's called the two-column design wouldn't make as much sense. So I'll talk about the two-column design here in a second. And so moving through this, also I used the same size text throughout this entire thing, but I used a hierarchy of textual markup and the indenting, nesting of things to indicate a hierarchy. So all of my major section headings are just bold and underlined. So the next layer down is just bold. And then the next layer down, we see text. We also see, because these are job titles, italicized text. I used to have paragraphs underneath each one of those, but I took those out to tighten things up. And so it's pretty simple, but I did create a hierarchy within the document. Okay, and then moving along, we can see kind of the same thing, that things are kind of nested underneath. I actually made these what are called hanging indentations, and that's under Format Paragraph in Microsoft Word. And then it goes on and on and on because we have conference presentations, etc. And this goes on for several pages. And so what I did after the first page was create a running header. So conference presentations and participation continued. And another thing that's happening in this document is that because I'm always adding things to it. I don't like to reformat it each time. That the bottom margin kind of floats up and down a little bit. At times, it might be as much as 1.5 inches. At times, maybe I've even made it less than 1 inch. But that just made it easier to insert material into it without having to reformat the entire thing each time. So there's my resume, and let me go into Microsoft Word and talk about resumes in general. Okay, so here I am in Microsoft Word where I was working on that letter, and I'm going to go to File, this time New Document from Template, because there are a number of templates that you can use for this assignment, and I'm going to use them right now because it's quick and easy to kind of see the document without me having to create it from scratch. So I'm just going to go up here and search resume, see what comes up, and there are a bunch of them. So some of them make use of color, and that's perfectly fine. Color, as we're sending documents back and forth electronically, color is free, so why not make use of color? And some of these down here toward the end I've seen coming up pretty regularly on student projects, so I think they're pretty good. Let me go kind of back to some of the more conventional resumes, and let me open this one. Okay, so when I mentioned this 2-column layout, that after we get past this header up here, we go down and, well, actually this is more of a modular setup here. They've got objective and skills over here. What I was expecting is that with a 2-column setup, sometimes we'll just have objective over here in this narrower first column. You can actually see the columns in the ruler up here. And then the content for that section, the statement of objective, over here next to it. And then we'll have the same thing with experience over here. So kind of the headers are all put in this narrower first column, and then the content is placed in the wider main column. And it creates more air between things over here, makes this a bit longer over here. So if you're struggling to fill up your resume, then you might want to go with the 2-column design. So let me see if I can find another example. Okay, this one's not quite what I was expecting either because, again, it's kind of more modular, that we have certain things over here, and then we have certain sections over here. So let me try one more time. Okay, this example actually is back to a single column design, but you can kind of get the sense of what you could do by putting experience and education and skills in their own column down here on the left, and then the content for each of those sections in a much wider column over here to the right. So whichever format you use is fine with me, and if you want to use one of these templates, that's fine with me as well. Okay, so hang on a second. Okay, so I think those were all the documents that I uploaded: the organizational profile sample, the application letter, my resume, job application letter stipulations, and then I previously mentioned that I uploaded these slides from Chapter 15. I didn't think you needed me to walk you through them and lecture about them, but if you have any questions about them, let me know. Okay, so those are my comments about those sample documents, and please work on your documents, and I'll be in contact to set up a time to a due date for the rough draft of these documents, and then a time to conference about them, and then a due date for the final draft. And once we do that, I can introduce the next assignment. Thank you very much.